I think most anglers know that a jerkbait is a great cold water bait. When the water temperatures are in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, there's a lot of guys that think to pick up a jerkbait. But once that water temperature starts to get warmer in the post-spawn and in the summer, a lot of guys will put this bait down and it still produces bass. And there are 3 situations during warm water months where I always pick up a jerkbait. And today I want to talk about those. So let's dive on in. Now, real quick before we get into these situations where I like to pick up a jerkbait, I really want to tell you why I think a lot of guys struggle fishing a jerkbait in warmer water. Now, the first reason is what I already mentioned. A lot of guys simply just don't pick it up. They don't think to pick it up. So if you're not picking a jerkbait up, you're obviously not going to catch them in that warm water. But the other reason is that I believe in warm water, bass really have kind of a narrow spectrum. They really get specific on what type of jerkbait they want. Not only what type, it might be what brand, what sound, what running depth, what color that they want. In colder water, a lot of times when I'm fishing in 40 and 50 degree water temperatures, I have found that there's actually a wider spectrum of jerkbaits that bass like. I catch a lot of fish on a Berkeley Stunna this time of the year, a bait that kind of slowly sinks. I also catch jerkbait fish on a Mega Bass Vision 110. I've also caught bass on a 6 Sense Provoke. I've caught bass on a Strike King bait. It seems like during colder water, the bass almost just have a wider spectrum of baits. And not only baits, but also colors. I've been fishing with guys before where I'm fishing a shad colored bait and they're fishing a perch colored bait or something like that. And we're both catching fish. But in the summer, in those warmer water temps, that's when I believe that bass are really narrow-minded and they really want a specific jerkbait. And a lot of guys aren't taking the time to kind of figure out that jerkbait that the fish want. And the reason that a lot of us should pick it up is because when you get on jerkbait bites in warmer water, you're typically one of the only people doing it. And also it seems to be a big fish pattern. I catch a lot of big fish this way in warm water. So if you're fishing tournaments, that's obviously what we want. But if you're not fishing tournaments, a lot of us just like to go out there and catch bass. Now, let's go ahead and dive into the situations in warm water where I will pick up that jerkbait. Now, the first situation is actually going to be directly after the bass spawn. A lot of times after the bass spawn, you will have a shad spawn. And in any of the lakes that you go to that have threadfin shad or gizzard shad, they typically kind of spawn on the tail end of the bass spawn. And a lot of times these fish in the morning and in the evenings, they're going to be in really shallow water. They're going to be very active and they actually just kind of flutter across hard objects like rocks and grass edges or stumps or docks. They will kind of flutter across these areas and they actually just kind of spit out their eggs. I was actually fishing one time and shad were actually laying eggs on my boat. It was crazy. But anyways, in those kind of low light conditions, that is when those fish are really active. And a great way to mimic a shad is with some sort of jerkbait. Now, the big thing about fishing a jerkbait during the shad spawn is a lot of times I'm actually not going to pick up one of my favorite jerkbaits, which is this one right here. This is a Berkeley Stunna. I've talked about this a lot on the channel. And the reason that I don't pick up that jerkbait, this specific jerkbait during that time of the year, is because that jerkbait will actually slowly sink in the water column. And a lot of times when you're fishing a shad spawn, you're fishing pretty shallow. And if you're fishing in shallow water with that jerkbait, I don't want that bait to actually hit the bottom and get hung down there. I really want it to suspend. And one of my favorite baits, there's a lot of great baits out there on the market, is a simple Strike King 300 series jerkbait. This is a great little suspending bait. The other reason that I like this, if you look at this bait in comparison to others, it has a little bit of a bigger profile to it. You can find jerkbaits that are really, really big, but this one, it just has a little bit bigger profile and I really like it during the shad spawn and during this time of the year. And the other thing about this jerkbait is that this particular color that I'm holding right here, this is, I think it's called a Pro Blue of some sort. This color comes in a lot of different brands of jerkbaits, but this Pro Blue color is one of the ones that I've had the best luck on no matter where I've been. I've caught bass on the Harris chain of lakes with this color. I've caught bass on Lake Erie, in Ohio, where I live. I've caught them in the Carolinas with this color. So this is a great color, but again, you have to remember that the bass get really specific on colors, running depths, even whether that bait is sinking or floating or staying completely suspended during the summer. So the big thing is just continue to experiment and look out for that shad spawn, because that is a great time to fish a jerkbait. Now, moving on to situation number 2 that I like to fish a jerkbait, and this is one that maybe is a little bit more sneaky, and that is anytime I am actually on a chatterbait bite, as long as I'm not in really dirty water, if I'm on a chatterbait bite, that is also when I'm starting to think of a jerkbait. And I know that this sounds kind of weird, but if you think about it, a lot of places where we fish a chatterbait, you're fishing in 4, 5, 6 foot of water. And that's about the running depth of most chatterbaits. Now, if you think about a jerkbait, most jerkbaits will actually get down to that same depth, about 4 to 6 foot. And in the summertime, if I hit a grass flat, a lot of times I'm thinking chatterbait, but guess what? Everybody else and their brother is also thinking chatterbait in that same situation. So sometimes simply being different, throwing a bait that not everybody else is throwing, is what is going to help you to catch a lot more fish. I'm not saying this is always the truth. Sometimes you see everyone's fishing a chatterbait, and that's because the bass are really eating a chatterbait. But in those situations where I like to throw a chatterbait, I'm starting to now pick up a jerkbait instead, just to simply be different. Grass flats is a great place that I do this. I also do this a lot when I'm fishing docks. A lot of guys will fish docks in the summer, especially just under the floats with a chatterbait, because those bass will suspend on some of those piers and come up. And I've actually had a lot of success throwing a jerkbait on those docks where those fish are suspending. Now, again, you want to make sure that you're constantly experimenting with colors, with jerkbaits out there when you are fishing. A lot of times you're going to get clues that the fish aren't on the jerkbait that you're using. For example, you will see fish that are following it. With your own eyes, you will see them. Now, if you have a forward-facing sonar like I do, a Mega Live, you can actually see fish that will come up to that jerkbait, they'll track it, and then they'll swim away. And anytime they're swimming away, I know that I have something wrong, and I'm gonna start to try to change something about my lure to get that specific bait that they want. Now, speaking of forward-facing sonars, I'm not sure if you guys have heard of this little bait right here. This is one I haven't fished it a lot yet, but I'm kind of excited about, and I'd love to hear your guys' take of this bait. I'm probably gonna do a full video on it at some point, but this is a Bill Lewis scope stick is what it's called. And if you look at this bait, this is actually the smaller version, but it's a very tall bait, up and down, and that tall bait actually shows up a little bit better on your forward facing sonar than a lot of the other skinnier jerkbaits. So I'm just interested to see if you guys have any comments about this bait. If you've used it, leave it down in the comments. Now let's go ahead and jump into situation number 3 that I always have a jerkbait, even when I'm fishing in that warm water, and that is anytime that I'm fishing for smallmouth bass or spotted bass. Those two fish species are extremely aggressive. They're like your little hyper brother or your little hyper cousin. They always seem to like a jerkbait. There are instances, there are times throughout the year where I feel like bass, largemouth, don't necessarily love a jerkbait, but it seems like no matter where I've gone in the country, even in the heat of the summer, I mean, I've been to Lake Hartwell in August and September when it's cooking, I can catch spotted bass on a jerkbait. I have fished in New York in the middle of August, and the smallmouth absolutely love a jerkbait. So again, anytime I'm fishing for those species, I will pick up a jerkbait. Now, one thing that's really important to remember about fishing a jerkbait for those species is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes really oddball bright colors like bright chartreuses will work well for spots and smallmouth. You'll be able to see them following your bait. If they're following it, you know they don't like it. But it seems like if they are liking that really bright color, you will catch some of the biggest spots and the biggest smallmouth on that bait. Those are the situations where I really like to fish a jerkbait in warm water. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.